Well, hello everyone. I'm Daryl Black, and I'm here to talk to you. This is technically episode, I think, number 29 of my Lead from the Inside Out podcast. And I'll be talking to you about the one thing that can make all the difference in the world. And it is just one thing. Now, I've had a lot of experience responding to crises over the last 30 years or so. And I've often thought, or I've been asked a lot of times, like, Daryl, why do you do it? Like, you always see the worst in people, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita and a bunch of floods and wildfires and search and rescue missions and all sorts of death and destruction and all those kinds of things. And my answer is actually the same every single time. And that's, I actually have the most amazing opportunity to see people come together. Because you see, ultimately, I know people are good. People at the individual level are inherently good people. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? We've seen on social media all the douchebags and assholes that are stockpiling as opposed to stocking up. And I get that. And that irritates me as well. But ultimately, the way I look at it is, that's a small subset of the population. And again, I do have it on very good authority that people are ultimately good and they will do the best that they can in any given situation. Are there exceptions? Absolutely there are. Now, I have spent over 30 years in crisis leadership, and I'm now a leadership consultant and all of that other stuff. But one of the examples I often use too is, when we went to Hurricane Katrina, and we were there for, I think, about 10 days or so. And, we came across a bunch of, whole range of individuals. And I thought to myself, that sure, in terms of preparedness and ability to cope, there was a wide range as well. We had one end of the spectrum that was like outstanding, super dialed in. And then another end of the spectrum that maybe wasn't quite as dialed in. But ultimately, when I looked at the difference between this group that maybe was suffering quite a bit and this group, it really came down to, at its very, very fundamental level, is responsibility. And not just any responsibility, but personal responsibility. So I am here to tell you and talk to you about being personally responsible during crisis, whether it be COVID, whether it be floods, whether it be fires, evacuations, anything like that. The principle of being personally responsible as a leader holds true no matter what. So what is the definition? It's really, I have to read this out because there are many, many different definitions, but it's the idea that human beings choose, instigate, or otherwise cause their own actions. So in other words, you are taking responsibility for how you behave, the decisions you make, the words you use, the life you lead, the type of team that you belong to, the type of team that you lead, how you lead, all those things ultimately comes down to you, the leader. And this ties directly into the crisis that we're facing on a global scale. And I'm going to be tying it in here throughout this episode. So in terms of being personally responsible, what does it mean in practical terms, right? I just read off a definition, but from a practical perspective, particularly around, say, COVID-19, it's lead by good example first and foremost. And oftentimes as leaders, we like to lead by example, and that's pretty cliche. I would submit to you that we want to lead by, add the word, good example. So what does that mean? Well, it means treating people with the utmost respect. It means being compassionate, being empathetic, being vulnerable, managing your stress, so being calm, walking the walk. And when we talk about COVID-19 specific kind of tactics and things like that, it can be as specific as washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, self-isolating. Don't ask somebody else to tell you to self-isolate, for example. If you're feeling sick, don't go out anywhere. And again, when you come inside from outside, wash your hands. You're leaving, all of that personal hygiene. that comes up when we're talking about things like COVID-19. So ultimately speaking, you need to take responsibility for that. There is not going to be always an external entity or agency or somebody else telling you. And the point I'm trying to make here is that ultimately success and failure for COVID-19 in any crisis comes down to individuals and the exercising of personal responsibility. So when I talked about Katrina and the spectrum, I was absolutely, and this is something I've seen time and time again. I'm just using Katrina as just an example. The folks that I talked about that really were well prepared, they were not the ones that were the most wealthy. They were not the ones that had more physical means than anybody else. They weren't the ones that weren't impacted by the hurricane, for example. They were the ones that actually decided to work together, but more importantly, take personal responsibility and not depend on government, not to depend on anyone else except themselves, and take it upon themselves to take care of themselves and their family, the vulnerable people in their lives, all of those things. So ultimately, the personality that is willing to take responsibility is the one that will succeed and fail. Now, the good news is society, any kind of group, is made up of individuals. So if each individual took personal responsibility, then that will have an aggregate kind of effect or compounding effect society-wide. And if you don't believe me, just trust me on that. If we all do our part, we will all get through this thing. So from a leadership perspective, first and foremost, take personal responsibility. And that's you there.